That's a yes. Right, good evening. I like to start any Pesach share with the following parable because I think it sets the scene, and I think it's a particularly poignant parable. This I heard, if you want the full track, from Rabbi Birnbaum here in Seed, who heard it in turn from Diane Hall from Rabbi Hall, I think from Kingsbury. No, Diane Hall, who said it in the name of his father, Rabbi Hall, the late Rabbi Hall from Kingsbury. They are. That's the full gamut of story, and it's actually quite appropriate to do that at this story, and I'll tell you why. So, like this, once upon a time, there was a competition in the jungle. This is it. Which animal can make? Gideon, you know this one? Yeah, he's had. My kids are like that as well. Yes, Daddy. Which animal can make the loudest noise? So the competition was which animal can make the loudest noise, and they had tryouts. In my version, they had tryouts actually. In the others, they don't. But whatever, I'm more competitive than most. Anyway, they had tryouts, and there were quarterfinals and semifinals. Finally, the final. Three animals made the final. There was the lion, because he had to, otherwise he'd eat everyone. There was the elephant and there was the monkey, right? And they all get up on the stage, and it's who can make the loudest noise. Now, the issue in the jungle, of course, is that their electronic equipment, well, they're not known for their electronic equipment, as you can imagine, and therefore they don't have ways to measure decibels or sound, etc. So what they did is they stationed various judges at distances from the stage. Yeah, in other words, if each judge, let's say if a judge 50 meters away heard the sound, flag would go up. That meant that sound had traveled 50 meters. Not quite empirical, but it's good enough. Anyway, the elephant gets up, tusks on display, lets out a big, actually not sure what sound elephants make. Bellow, roar,
Trumpet.
trumpet, elephant's trumpet. Good enough for me, Gideon. Okay, trumpeted away, and the flag goes up 50 meters. Excellent. The crowd cheer. Fantastic. Monkey gets up next and makes a. Come on, Gideon. You did the elephant. Monkey lets out a monkey version of an elephant trumpeting. Yeah. Basically, monkey again, deep breath, lungs aplenty, and shouts, and flag goes up 100 meters. No one's thinking, oh, that's very good. Anyway, lion gets up. Everyone's nervous if the lion doesn't win. And lion lets out this tremendous, I got this one, Gideon, roar. And a call, massive sound. Everyone starts shrieking and know what's happening. 150 meters. The lion's name is about to be engraved on the trophy. But at that point, there's a bird that flies onto the stage. Yeah. What's the bird? The bird says, I want to turn. And everyone's like laughing. I can't, what's the bird going to do? Ridiculous. Yeah. So the bird says, no, I want to turn. Fine. The bird gets up and emits a little tweet. In the days where this parable was said 20 years ago, you probably didn't need to define that it was a real tweet, not an electronic one. So I'm going to reiterate that. Yeah, a flag, little tiny flag goes up for the occasion, 20 meters. Everyone's laughing and it's like a joke and like I told you so. Anyway, at that 20 meters, there's a bit of silence because stationed there was another bird. And that second bird heard the tweet of the first bird and makes a reciprocal tweet. And lo and behold, 20 meters from the second bird, there's a third bird. And guess what that third bird does? Another tweet, 20 meters by 20 meters, each bird stationed on a tree until the sound is way through, over 150 meters, a kilometer out the jungle, and the bird, subject to certain legal disputes over defining loud, and then traveling in terms of, traveling in distance, the bird wins the trophy. Yeah. And when Rabbi Hall said this, he said something beautiful. And he was talking about Seder Night. He says, you see that there are many cultures that make loud noises, right? But what we see on Seder Night is it's not the loudest noise that carries through the generations. It's the most genuine and heartfelt noise. You don't need to be loud. You just need to be genuine, right? Effectively, what we do every Seder Night is we take the place of one of those birds perched on trees, whether they're perched on a tree, whether they're perched in Edgware, or they're perched in anywhere, or even Yerushalayim, we could be currently perched. And we transfer it to the next generation. So the plan for the next 20 and a half minutes is to give some, I would say, key ideas or key things to think about to make that transfer or that transmission successful. Okay, so point number one in context is as follows. there are two things we, broadly speaking, commemorate, actually relive, re-experience on Seder night. Meaning, Jewish notion of time is that time has energy. In other words, when we re-experience this date of the 15th of Nisan, we tap into an energy that's emitted on that date. In other words, in secular thought, time is just a way of measuring things. In Jewish thought, that's not true at all. Time has inbuilt into it certain real energies. Just like place has energy, so the Kotel, for example, has a certain energy, spiritual energy, which is different to Hebron, which has a different spiritual energy, which is different to, I don't know, the A41 here, which has a slightly different energy, right? Space has real energies that were inbuilt in creation. That means that they produce and create certain things. By the way, there's certain countries that Jews are not allowed to live in because they emit certain spiritually negative energies. Egypt, for example, right? Technically speaking, we're not allowed to live in Egypt. Terms and conditions apply. Anyway, time, I apologize, also has energies. It means that when you hit a certain date on the Jewish calendar, the energy that gets emitted, a particular one for each Chag, each festival, and as a consequence, it's easier to tap into that energy. So, for example, during the 9 days, I could give you a negative one, around Tisha B'Av, there's an energy of destruction or gets expressed as danger, right? That's why during that time, we're not allowed to do anything dangerous. Not because we're commemorating what once was in terms of the temple, but because it's actually dangerous because the energy is still there, right? Pesach has an energy of freedom. That's why we left Egypt on that date. The energy catapulted us out of Egypt, so to speak. And that's why on that date, in the course of Jewish history, various freedom-related things have occurred. So, for example, and if you know that Daniel, close to my heart, of course, Daniel was released. He left the lion's den on Seder night. That was the date. He was released from that. Avimelech has a dream to release Sarah from her captivity on Seder night. Right? The Assyrian Sancherev, the Assyrian army, were encamping around Jerusalem, and they were about to attack. On Seder night, there was a massive plague, and they all got wiped out. That's also on Seder night, right? Stom was wiped out on Seder night. In other words, things that involve releasing people, the energy of freedom is embedded in Seder night, and therefore will express itself in the course of history at various times. Okay? Now, let's go a level deeper. Time is energy. In others, time has inbuilt with it in it certain energies, which is fine. It's axiomatic Jewishly. And more than that, I want to show you another element of time which is crucial that we do on Seder night. Okay, so here's the point. On Seder night, there are two things that we talk about: slavery and freedom. We're going to get to them very, very soon, but just hold with me for this segment. Slavery and freedom. Now, if I ask you, how do we express freedom on Seder night? You'll tell me that. Go on. We lean, we have 4 cups of wine. Some people act out walking out of Egypt. Some people do all sorts of things. That's fine. What do we do to reenact slavery? Not much. We have maror.
Yeah.
Pardon?
The bitter herbs, yeah.
Yeah, the bitter herbs, right? Maror. Right now, we do that after we've already Lent. We do that after we've already recited half of Hallel. So why does slavery not express itself properly in Egypt? If this was a narrative, you'd have half about slavery and half about freedom, and it doesn't. Right? So the answer is really important to how we view Jewish history. It's like this. On Seder night, we don't have slavery expressing itself in its own context. We have slavery express itself knowing that we've already been freed and as a footstep towards freedom. You hear that? In graphic form, when we have the Hillel sandwich, which my father, bless him, always calls the Muk Hillel. When we have the Hillel sandwich, you have the maror, which is slavery, and the matzah all together, and you ingest, right? Hopefully digest, because the slavery and the freedom is part of one bundled package. In other words, it's not that despite the slavery we were freed, it's because of the slavery we were freed. What that means is the way we view time, this is really important, is that when we hit phase 2 of time, we then look back at phase 1 and look at it in a new light, knowing what we know in phase two. And now, sometimes we do this intuitively, sometimes we don't. But when we hit a part of Jewish history, we're supposed to look back and see, oh, wow, there must have been sequence. This in the past, which I thought of as a standalone bitter experience, right, actually was a footstep towards something which was either more positive, or I see the bigger picture now, right? To put it a little bit more graphically, pain exists when we're in the zone of I guess, frame or index of time, right? You can have example, exercise. Yeah, exercise, I could tell you firsthand, is very, very painful. Yeah. And at the time it feels painful. Lactic acid is not fun. Yeah, this is not. Uh, but because it's leading somewhere, you're okay with that, right? Things that are very, very, very painful often are where we don't see light at the end of the tunnel. We don't see past it, and we don't see what that is in the context of life and challenge and Jewish history and mission and purpose and destiny and legacy. We don't. We just view it as, oh my goodness, this is terrible, right? Um, when we take a step out of time, which we normally can't, then we can view things from kind of we can view things to where they really are. Right? On Pesach, what we do is we try and step out of time, or we mess with time. Right? In other words, matzah and chametz, the difference is time. The first mitzvah we got was controlling the months. Right? The tradition says, and the Rambam in his Haggadah has this at the beginning, we left Egypt in a rush. In other words, part of the exodus from Egypt is a manipulation of, or a reorganizing of, or a leaving the confines of time. Yeah, and therefore, practically, again, the reason we do that is to then view anything in the past through the context of what we currently experience. And please God, it will be like that in the future. When we get to the final redemption, we'll look back and say, oh wow, I understand that now. Well, yeah, that was really painful, but now I see how that was a footstep to that, and that led to that, and that led to that. We'll be privy to that information one day. Okay. Anyway, that was my first point in terms of time. Now, the second point in terms of Seder night is as follows. This is essential and central, and it goes as follows. Seder night is not, I repeat, not a freedom narrative. Meaning, lots of other nations, unfortunately, were subjugated and then freed. Right? That is not our narrative on Seder night. We were slaves and we became free. That's definitely true. But firstly, our freedom wasn't just, oh, we're no longer slaves. Point one to be discussed in a second. And point two, the focus is not on we were slaves, now we're free. The focus is on the plagues themselves. And was the mechanism that created freedom. Let's do them one by one. Number one, going from slavery to freedom is not the focal point, because Jewish freedom that happened in Egypt is more than just normal freedom, is as follows. On Pesach, we were made essentially free. What that means is as follows. Have you ever tried to cover up something and at some point it's just like, too much to cover it up and eventually give the game away? Yeah, those kind of moments, whether a secret or whether just you're angry. And yeah, so the Maral says it like this: things that are essential will always express themselves. It might take time, but they always express themselves. Things that are peripheral, right? They can come and go, and there's no reason that they should express themselves. They're just peripheral. The context he has it in is the Jewish people deserve redemption. In other words, what we call the goal of final redemption. They deserve freedom, and therefore that will always express itself. In other words, on Pesach, we acquired something called essential freedom, whereby any subsequent slavery would by nature only be temporary, because we have it deep ingrained within our kind of DNA, our national DNA, that we are essentially free. Right? In other words, it's not just we experienced lack of Egyptian slavery, it was placed into our DNA that we are essentially people who are free. And that's really important. That's why, and if you see these terrible but yet heroic, I guess you'd call them logbooks or records of people keeping Pesach in Auschwitz and smuggling in matzahs and things like that. I mean, apart from the heroism of it and risking your life and etc., it's the festival of freedom. What are you doing with that in Auschwitz? Right? I mean, talk about dissonance, right? And it's not at all, because it's the festival of freedom showing you're essentially free, and therefore anyone who subsequently subjugates you will be temporary. It's not going to be forever, because essential qualities will express themselves. Okay, so that's element one, that it's not just a freedom narrative. Element two is that on Seder night we don't focus on the freedom per se. It's great, and we're grateful for it, but we focus on the plagues. The Rambam is very clear that the night of the 15th of Nisan, meaning Seder night, is about talking about what he calls the Nissim and Niflaot, as the miracles that Hashem did for us. Right? Why is that important? Because many nations, we kind of quoted briefly before, many nations were unfortunately treated harshly in one epoch of history, and at some point that bondage was released at some stage. Yeah, that also happened to us several times. There were several times we were released from exile and etc. And we don't have a night commemorating all of them, right? We don't, right? We don't have a night commemorating the rebuilding of the temple, when Koresh allowed us to rebuild the temple. We don't have that. Allowed us to go from Bavel. We don't have that. Right? The Exodus was about God lifting us up to a new level through miracles. In other words, it was the fact that God decided, right, I'm not just going to take them out, but I'm going to show them miracles, which have three strands we'll talk about in a second, the plagues, which brought them to a new precipice, such that they could live their national mission of A, being solid in their faith, and B, being bastions of faith for everyone, basically, throughout history. So here are those three strands that happen in the plagues. Number one, the plagues undoubtedly punished the Egyptians. And that was also showing Hashem's hand. Right? Punish the Egyptians. Part of faith is that the world is essentially there, both this world and the next world, and they have to be taken in context together. It's fair. And therefore, the plagues punish Egyptians for their treatment of us. Number one. Number two, the Egyptians were a show of emunah, of faith. Right? In other words, you couldn't deny God once you saw those plagues. Impossible. In fact, the Maharal points out really cutely, he says that the plagues were in topographical order. Right? I hope, Gideon, you know this one as well. I've said it quite a few times. Plagues in topographical order, such that they started low and ended up high. Meaning, they started from below the river and ended up in the sky. It's all together now. Yeah, blood is river level, right? Now you've got frogs are coming out the river, that's a level higher. Kinim, lice are crawling on the ground. That's ground level. That's a bit higher. Arov is wild animals. So they're properly crawling above the lice. Yeah. They speak. Dever is animal epidemic. So that's something in the atmosphere affecting the animals. Dever. Shchin is now humans. You're level higher. Go on. Help me. Go on. Barad. Thank you. Barad is something from the sky going into the ground. Arba is the locust, something from the sky, eating the stuff above the ground. Choshech is darkness pervading the atmosphere, and Makas B'choris is Hashem directly coming down. So you've got a topographical sequence, order in how the plagues work, telling the Egyptians, stop looking down and start looking up. Yeah? And lastly, the Maharal points out that the plagues, and this is quite deep, also purified the world. In other words, a world that was created with 10 sayings. When God created the world, the tradition is he spoke them into existence. Meaning it says 10 times, let there be light, let there, etc. That means that he, so to speak, invested himself. When you speak, you're investing some of yourself, your breath, into the world. And he did it with 10 sayings, investing it with Kedusha, holiness. 10 is the number of Kedusha, sanctity. 10 in a minyan, Yom Kippur is the 10th, 10 commandments, 10 plagues, etc. Right? So he invested the world with holiness. Right? Every name of God has a yud, which is the 10th letter. The Egyptians, in their wickedness and spiritual callousness, they defiled and sullied a world created from 10 sayings. Yeah. And therefore, the plagues were there to peel off those layers of impurity. And that's why Maharal says there's a link, there's a correlation between the 10 plagues and the 10 sayings. For example, the first saying is in the world is the creation of time or beginnings, and that mirrors the last plague, which is the expiration of time, meaning plague of the firstborns. Yeah, the penultimate plague was darkness, and the second saying the world's creation is let there be light. So you've got this correlation, right? So again, you've got your plagues creating faith, creating purity, and punishing the Egyptians measure for measure. And it is important when we do talk about Seder Night, or we do get involved in Seder Night, the plan is to focus on those plagues, right? To talk about the slavery as a build-out to the plagues, but speak about the miracles and speak about the plagues. Okay, those are key. Okay, so let me summarize what I've done, and I'm going to hop off a couple of minutes early because it's a miracle that I'm out, to be honest. Given Pesach preparations, my kitchen looks like it's about to take off. I'm just hopefully no one's going to bring a magnet. It feels quite metallic, I have to say. Sonorous. If anyone wants to bring musical instruments to my kitchen, I'm sure they'll have a whale of a time producing various sounds. And if they can drown out the screaming, of course. But on a serious note, what have we done tonight? We've done a few things. Number one is we have talked about the notion of slavery and freedom, namely that slavery was but a step to freedom. And we look at the whole of Jewish history like that. When you get to phase 2, you look back at phase 1 and see God's hand. Number 2, we've said that the plagues were central more than the slavery. And number 3, we talked about what those plagues are and what they achieved. Yeah, meaning you've got your emunah, you've got your purification, and that's part of our sequence on Seder Night. Also remember that we are essentially free. That means we have qualities of freedom, just like time has energies and space has energies. To an extent, we have energies as well. Right? Slightly different, but to an extent, we have them as well. And that's our last part of Seder Night. Good. People, I'm going to wish you a fantastic Pesach. We're going to take a break. Hold on. Jonathan asked the question. Splitting of the sea and essential freedom and splitting of the waters. A good question. Good question. I'm going to have to think about it to give a proper answer. There must be. I actually read the Rambam about this recently, about how the nature of miracles, like a phase 2. The splitting of the sea is like a phase 2. It's not. We don't mention it on Seder Night fully. We do mention it briefly. It's not fully there. So it's a phase 2. So yeah, and then the last days of Pesach before that. Fine. Be that as it may. I wish everyone a good Pesach. Next week there's no share. 2 weeks time we're back with a bang because we're going to look at the purpose of the world. Why would an infinite world create finite us? If anyone doesn't think that they're finite, it might be a share to skip. Just saying. Also, please let me know. All right, people, have an amazing Pesach. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Good to see you all. If you're
Chag
flying,
Sameach.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach, Esther. See you.
Bye.